Good to see everybody out this morning. So I am not the regular preacher, as most of you know. If you're visitors, I am not he, thankfully. He is somewhere else this morning, and the elders have graciously allowed me to speak to you about the trip I took to Malawi in July of this year. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, the Malawi trip in July. I also want to briefly kind of give a overview summary of where we are as far as supporting our preachers in Mexico and that work, and then wrap up with a few final thoughts. And Anderson asked me, well, how long is it going to take? And I said, I have no idea. So buckle up. No, hopefully it won't be that long. But just to give you a little bit of background, as many of you know, since really started 2016-ish, I've been working with Javier Serrano in the Spanish community, and then since, I guess, 2017 was my initial trip, and then 19, 20, 21, I've taken several trips to Mexico, and that has led to us developing relationships with preachers in Mexico, and we are now supporting several preachers, helping to support several preachers in Mexico, and Lord willing, I hope to continue that. I had wonderful plans this year to go to Mexico, maybe even two or three times, and then Malawi came into the picture, and kind of like Paul, who wanted to go to Asia, and the Lord said, no, you're not going there. It wasn't quite that direct, don't get me wrong, but this came up, and this opportunity came up, and I talked to the elders, and again, they graciously allowed me to take this little diversion. And the reason it came up, not the only reason, I would love to have gone to Malawi under any circumstances to help. But in this specific instance, my brother, who's a member up at Goose Lane, Hughes Road in Madison, Huntsville area, asked me to go with him. And so the opportunity to go to Malawi and go with my brother, older brother, was just too much for me to pass up. So that's what we did. So if many of you don't know, Malawi is a relatively small country in Africa, Southeast Africa. So you have Mozambique, which Bill is very familiar with Mozambique. He's been there several times. And the Malawi is sitting right there, kind of that skinny country right there. And as you well may know, getting to Malawi is not easy. It is a almost 16-hour flight from Atlanta to Johannesburg, South Africa, and then another 3-hour flight approximately from Johannesburg to Lilongwe, Malawi. So just the logistics of getting to Malawi it's a day and a half, 2 days almost. We were gone 11, 12 days. We were in country 8 days. So, and that is a lot different. There are a lot of reasons that I chose Spanish and not anything else, is just the practicalities of it. Obviously, we have large Spanish populations in the country, in Alabama, so it can be used daily. And also, you don't have jet lag when you go to Mexico or South America, so that's another good thing. So it's nice. But the logistics of Malawi are definitely a thing. This is their international airport, and it's not very large, as you may see. We got off, you get off the plane and you walk to the place, so there's no connector things. It's like the Montgomery Airport. Okay, if any of you have ever been to Montgomery International Airport, there you go. So customs is always interesting anywhere you go. It's especially true for Malawi. But, it's kind of the same thing. You got to have all your papers and your passports, and you get through. Co-workers. So we'll start, obviously, me on the left. That's my brother David. Next to me, he is much older than I am. He's 5 years older than I am. But a wonderful big brother. Has always, some of you may have had big brothers that picked on you or were mean to you or anything like that. I did not have that. I had and have always had a big brother that was wonderful and took care of me and stood up for me and was always a great example. So I'm very thankful for that. Next to David is Shadrach, or Shad, as we call him. And you'll notice Shad's a big dude, especially in Malawi. He's a big guy. And so it's always good to have Shadrach with you because nobody's going to mess with you when Shad's around. But Shad works with Larry, and we'll go far to the right. Larry is the very tall guy in the back in the Auburn gear. Larry is like Robert. He's 6'7", 6'8", played basketball in college, and never meets a stranger. So just super nice and outgoing. And just a quick story before we run through the rest of the people. David and the church at Gooch Lane, or the church at Gooch Lane, Hughes Road, they support Larry in his work and have done so for about 7 years now. About 7 years ago, Larry decided to move to Malawi full-time, and he works there full-time, all the time, and he has been doing that for several years. And so this is David's second trip to Malawi, and like us, they want to not just send money to the preachers, they want to have those relationships, close ties, meet people. So although it was my first trip to Malawi, and that's always great, what was also wonderful to see is it was David's second trip. And so he was getting to see these people for the second time, and just seeing him see them and meet them for the second time was just a delight. We are literally driving down the road in a long way. This is the first day we were there, okay? And we'll talk about logistics a little bit later. But there's just this little story. We're just driving down the road, and we come to this four-way stop, and there are literally dozens of people are in this intersection type place, okay? No red lights at all. And we look over to the right, and there is, he's not in this picture. There's another guy that David had known, and he was just sitting there talking to a bunch of people, and he saw them, so we got out of the car and talked to him. But anyway, just that reaction, and having been back to Mexico several times, and those relationships and developing those relationships, it's such a special thing. So that was wonderful to see. Precious, who's the little guy next to Shadrach, was our driver, and he was awesome. His English is pretty good, but not great. But he took care of us. He drove us everywhere we needed to go. And then next to Precious, in the white shirt, is Frank. His English is very good. He studies at university, very smart. He ended up translating most of our sermons. Just very impressive young man and young Christian. Several days into the journey, they didn't go with us, and they didn't come until later because they were staying past when we stayed. But that's Wendell and Misty, and they're from Arizona. This is like their fourth or fifth trip to Malawi, and so they're experts, old hands. And then they had brought Melissa, who's on the far right. This was her first time, right? And it was also interesting. Her first time, it can be overwhelming, just everything about it. So, but they're quite wonderful. And so the last several days, when we were working in the southern part of Malawi, this was our group. And, we usually always had 2 cars, sometimes 3 cars, going places logistically. So it was quite the thing. But those are a lot of the people that I got to know and that I worked with, and it was just fantastic. As y'all know, one of the most wonderful things about going and doing the work is meeting people and working with them and just getting to know them. So one of the difficult things sometimes is just literally, well, where are we? It's like, what town or province or where are we? Thus the 3 names for this particular place where we went. This was, if you look at a map of Malawi, Lilongwe is kind of in the center. So again, you kind of have this long country, thin. Lilongwe is in the middle. And this was the first place we went that first day, and it was relatively close. It was within maybe a couple of hours. And as you will notice, so this is a picture of the inside of the building and the outside of the building. The inside, that's their pews, which is just concrete steps almost. They probably take bricks. They make a lot of their own bricks and put mortar on it. And now they have a little, pew, a seat, all right? And that's where they sit. And when we got there, and again, we got lost a lot. And so we would literally sometimes be an hour late, 2 hours late, 3 hours late. They had been there for 3 or 4 hours, and they were still there. We invite a preacher and he's 30 minutes late. It's like, we're out. That's not what they did. But the place was absolutely packed. I thought it was packed because we're sitting in there, and we're kind of, in this particular time we were kind of towards the back and the right, and I thought the place was full. But then people kept coming in, and they just kept moving up and sitting closer together. And I was like, how in the world are they going to get these other 50 people in? But they just did it. And so they will get, there had to be 300 people in there. I mean, it was crazy. But they just kept scrunching and they did that. So that was the first place that we preached, and it was a good kind of introduction into the area. We would preach in English, and then we would have translators. And so that was my first time. When I go to Mexico, when I preach, I've gotten where I preach in Spanish. But that was not going to happen here. So we had the translators. And then, again, names. Names are hard. I just named it the Remote Village. And I should have put remote in all caps because quite literally it took us about 6 hours to get there, and it wasn't that well. We were further south this time. So we had left Lilongwe, but we did get lost. We didn't, I guess lost in the sense that we didn't know where we were, or maybe even where we were going. But we were going in the right direction. We didn't have to backtrack. But there's no road signs. We finally got somebody that. So you're going along, and you're 3-4 hours into the trip, and you stop in something that remotely looks like a town, and a guy gets in the car with you, and they tell you, this guy knows where we're going. And you're like, okay, let's hope he knows where we're going. And we eventually made it. So it is, Robert knows a little bit about logistics. He went with me to Mexico. Robert just exponentially worse, or more challenging. It was quite the thing. So this particular place was affected by the flooding, and again, some backstory to this. a lot of the places that we went had been, if you go back and look at news articles from like early 23, a typhoon, what they call hurricane, had come in and just really flooded the southern part of Malawi. And it just devastated. And a lot of Christians were affected. And so a lot of churches from the U.S., including Gooch Lane, sent money to help churches and Christians over there. And one of the things that we were doing was going to visit those churches that they had helped, and you see, how are you doing? Do you need more help? Okay. And so this is one of those, and so I'm pontificating in English, and Frank is translating for me. And of course, when you're doing that, you just have to really simplify, right? Just simplify, because the lessons take twice as long because they have to be translated. But that's good, because it just makes you think about, what's fundamentally the most, I hate to say basic, but most essential, that's probably a better word, thing do you want to communicate to these people? So I ended up, I talked about the Samaritan woman at the well. I talked about the Good Samaritan. And some of these, and I talked about family. Right? So some of these really fundamental things that I hope were somewhat helpful and encouraging to them. This is Larry. He's preaching here, and then David's preaching on the right. Larry is no nonsense. So you kind of see him here. He's got his iPad Bible. That's where he keeps all his notes, in this hand. And he's got this hand like this, and he's just chopping the whole time. And so he's emphatic, and he's been there several years, so he can say things in ways and more directly that probably David and I are not comfortable saying. And it's just who Larry is. He's just no nonsense, cut to the chase. Here's what you need to do. So, but he's fantastic, and they love him. They absolutely love him. Sometimes, this is literally the truth, we would ride into the villages, and all the kids, whenever they see a car, they just start mobbing the car, and they would like chanting his name, Larry, Larry, Larry. And they love him. They love him. He's doing great work over there. Great work. Logistics. This slide is for Robert. I wish we could see these pictures a little bit better, but this is on the left. That's sort of a road that we're on. And if you notice, so this is the car I was in, and the car in front of us was our road, was with us. But the truck, too, in front of us was not us. There had to be 20 people in the back of that truck, at least. I've never seen so many humans able to get into a vehicle in my life. And like I said, this was sort of a road we were on. I don't know if it was any better than not the road. Then on the right, obviously it was nighttime, in the middle of the night, one of our cars got stuck. And you think you're kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and you are, but then like 100 people will just show up. And that's kind of what happened here. Oh, it's a car got stuck. Let's get all these guys and try to push it out. But the flooding had caused so much washout in the roads that the roads were washed out, and in that particular area right there where that car got stuck, literally it's like a 10-foot gully almost. It was quite terrible. But if you want to, go home and read some articles about the flooding, because it was quite bad. So logistics is a thing. Food is a thing when you go to Malawi. So listen, don't get me started on how ridiculous we have it with food here. Most all of us are probably going to go somewhere after this and order something, and it's probably going to taste quite delicious. And then this evening we'll do something similar. They are wonderful with their food. So usually after the service or the meeting, they would have us go to one of the houses which is kind of a room. This picture doesn't do it justice, but it was just a room. There's no furniture. They don't typically really have much furniture. And so but they would usually find some plastic chairs for us sometimes. And so we'd sit around and they would give us the absolute best they had. That's usually a lot of rice, and goat. So we ate a bit of goat. Every now and then you'd have chicken and some other things. Their main diet is something called sema, which think about grits but more consistency, right? To where it's almost, you can tear it, almost like a piece of bread. And that's what the lady on the right is cooking. So she's sitting there with what looks to be like a boat paddle, and she is cooking the sema. So ate a lot of rice. But part of when you're doing a work like this, Larry, they obviously do a lot of teaching and preaching, but there's a lot of there's a lot of humanitarian efforts involved in that too. He is constantly helping them with food and all sorts of things that they need, clothing. We talked a lot about what's the best way to help people with the basic necessities, food, clothing. One of the issues is, well, how do they handle Lord's Supper, particularly like the grape juice? The bread's not a huge chore, but the grape juice is, the fruit of the vine is. That is a logistical challenge, right, for them. So food is, and Bill's been to Mozambique, he knows. But none of us got sick, so that's a plus. Lodging was a thing. We had initially thought that we may be camping out, because sometimes Larry does that. So David and I were prepared to do that, at least on paper. Mentally, I'm not so certain. Fortunately, we did not have to do that. Possibly next time. There are challenges to that as well. One of the reasons they camp out is because hotels are not as easy to find there as here, especially when you get out in the country. It's very difficult. And so just from a logistics standpoint, it's better just to get out there, you pitch your tent, and there you go. We had so many people, some of which were women at times, that they decided against that on this particular occasion. And there are also, again, difficulties with that, because if you do camp out near the village, they say that the kids will never leave you alone, right? So they'll be around your tent at 2 o'clock in the morning. You just kind of have to pick your poison. Fortunately, though, they did find lodging for us. When you're in the city, Lilongwe or Blantyre are the two major cities there. They have hotels, but we were not there usually, and so they found, I call them lodges. They were sort of like motels, but I would characterize them more as lodges. The picture of the right it was a bed on the right. Mosquitoes are a thing over there. Malaria is a thing over there. So you are usually sleeping in a bed with a mosquito net, and you usually before bed you are spraying something called Doom, which is not very comforting. It's like you see a bottle and it says Doom on it. It's like, whose doom is this? Hopefully it's the mosquitoes and not mine. But you spray the Doom, and you pray that mosquitoes don't get in. But again, it is a different world. It's just a different world, and I can barely touch the hem of the garment with the stuff that we're doing. But lodging in with logistics, it's a thing. So I don't know if you can notice over here, there's a tree, and on this side of the tree, there is a big kettle type thing and a fire. Well, he's heating water, because every morning he would bring everybody a thing of hot water, because there was no hot water. And that's where we got hot water for the showers. or for anything in the morning. So again, it's just a different world. Just a different world. But very interesting. This is a picture of, I would call town, not the cities, not Lilongwe or Blantyre. They are in many respects modern cities, at least parts of them are. But this, you would just have countless towns that we would pass through, and essentially they're just like market areas. But it's kind of like a county seat almost, where everybody from the surrounding area would come there, and so you're driving in the middle of nowhere down a road, and then you come into this area with all these kind of markets and streets and stuff. And so, again, the pictures don't do it justice, but there's just people everywhere, just everywhere. So it's interesting. But they said, you have to be careful. Don't take pictures like with your phone, like near the window, because they'll just come snatch it. And then we always have people with us, but they take good care of us. But I'll say one of the interesting things about Malawi is, generally speaking, it is a very peaceful country. So the concerns are different than Mexico. There are legitimate concerns. Mexico has violence issues that, not a lot of other countries do have. It's even, it's different than even going to Peru or some places in South America. Malawi, we do not have those issues. You don't have kind of violence issues with that. Most of the crime that they have would be petty theft and things like that. So, everywhere you go is a little bit different. But the towns were definitely interesting. Again, names, I did not always get clarification of where we were when we were somewhere. So I just put south here. We were way down south in the southern part of Malawi. Literally, at one point, we're on a road where on the right side of the road was Mozambique, on the left side was Malawi. So we're way on down there. And so we went to see several churches down there. And again, they have this church building. They make their own bricks. You would see the bricks, and there's David, Frank. And again, we would come into a village, they would be expecting us, and we would just kind of get swarmed. Usually what we would do is we would have a service, and with the sermon, and then we would break off into classes. And then we'd have a men's class. And Wendell, who he's there on the right, had developed kind of some materials, and he had used someone else's as well, but developed the materials. And what he was trying to do, and he did a great job of it, is big picture of the Bible. What is the Bible trying to say? Because it's easy to get lost in the weeds. And so he's really trying to talk about, the story of redemption through the Bible, from Genesis through Revelation. And he had some really good material about that, and they were very interested, and they had some very good questions. Okay? And that's what he did a lot of when he taught his class. And then also there would be a women's class, and Misty, who's Wendell's wife, she's been there several times, and a lot of times she would teach the women's class. And there are a lot of specific issues that they would talk about and discuss that were challenging, but they would talk about that. One note about this picture on the right, you see these two little kids. They're walking into the women's class. That's kind of why I put it there, or towards it. But if you notice, two very small kids. One's 4 and 3, maybe, if that. And they're holding hands. It amazed me the responsibility that little kids had for other children. It was just expected, listen, my kids are 18 and 20, and they still don't have a lot of responsibility. But you saw little kids taking care of other little kids, and they just have to grow up really fast when it comes to that. And so it was quite amazing, and I just love that picture. And then of course they had a kids class, and so they would break off, and Melissa, this was her first time, but she did a great job of teaching the kids class. And Precious, who just is his great personality and very energetic, he would help with the translations, and they would sing songs, and it was just a joy to watch. Sometimes I would dip out of the men's class, and I would just go and see and watch the kids class, and how exuberant they were and interested they were. It was just it was really good. One of the best parts of the trip was just getting to see the kids and talk to the kids and spend time with them. It was just fantastic. And then I just had to throw in some more pictures, of just some great pictures that I thought were wonderful. So the one in the middle, the little girl in the middle, so the kids it's kind of two ways. On one hand, they're really, as a group, they will kind of mob you when you come in, but individually they are somewhat standoffish. And so I was kind of standing, they had broken into the classes, and I was kind of standing apart, kind of watching from afar, and this little girl in the middle, she came up, and she just started kind of getting closer and closer and watering up, and she just finally kind of just settled in and just stood next to me and stood up looking at me. And so anyway, and David took a couple of these other pictures as well. So it was just great to see people and know. This is the thing about the gospel. It cuts away everything else. Doesn't matter where you're from, what language you speak, what socioeconomic, demographic background, whether you're educated or not educated, it doesn't matter. Because we're all God's children. And when that happens, just everything else just goes away. And that's, to me, the most wonderful thing about going on these trips is you immediately have this bond and connection to people halfway across the world. So this is Anderson asked me if I had any funny slides, and not really, but here's my funniest one. I started a bed and breakfast while we were over there. Beth was rather concerned. Yeah, a bed and breakfast. And then the kids were just, when they would see the car, which they see cars, but especially when you're out in the country, but not all the time, so it's like, oh, it's kind of a big deal, there's a car. But then David and I were usually in the back seat, and we had the windows rolled down, and then when they saw, somebody as pasty and pale as I am, they just kind of went nuts. And so they would literally follow us for quite a while, and we were quite the hit. So, but the kids, again, were probably the best part of the trip. They were just fantastic. And then brothers, I've got this slide here, and obviously I'm very grateful that I got to go on this trip with my brother. But I also am very grateful that I met some of my new brothers, right, in Christ. And that was just a wonderful, wonderful thing. I'm going to wrap up very quickly with the Spanish work. I wanted some slides, but I knew I was going to go along anyway. So we are, I continue, although this Malawi trip was wonderful, and I would love to go back. I'm really committed to Mexico and the Spanish work and Javier, and we have made commitments to several preachers there, and that's what we're going to be doing moving forward, and a lot of you know that. And so we're going to have Lord willing, we're going to plan, more trips next year and continue to develop those relationships. And what I want to do today is encourage you in whatever way you can, right, to be involved with that, okay? You don't have to go to Mexico. You don't have to go to Malawi, okay? We all have different skills. We all have different things we can contribute. But what I do want to encourage you to do is figure out what you can do, okay? And it doesn't even have to be with the Mexico work. It could be, we have people here right now that do a lot of work in different areas. We have people that are very involved with First Light, people who spent time at Aspire. We have people, our own people who need help, okay? Our own people. You don't even have to go outside of this church to find people who need help. Not just, oh, how's it going? You know, help, okay? Time. They need your time. And so I would encourage you, right, to do that. Whatever your station is, whatever your situation is, it's all different. Some of us are older, some of us are younger, some of us, again, have different work situations, family situations. But no matter what it is, you can figure out something that you can do, okay? And the wonderful thing is the last thing. I promise it's the last thing I'll say. The wonderful thing about it is this. I get back from these trips, and I do this, and I don't feel like I've contributed much, right? I feel like I have gotten way more from it than I have given to it. And that is the wonderful thing about serving God, that when we empty ourselves, he fills us back up. And nothing else does that. The things of the world, they're empty and void, and you do them and you still feel empty, and you do them and you still feel empty. Only work for the Lord is the opposite. You empty yourself and he fills you back up, and it's just miraculous. So I would encourage you to do that. I know you do. This group does a wonderful job, but I would encourage you to continue to do that. If you have any other questions about Malawi, want to see more pictures, Mexico, want to see more pictures, anything at all, I love talking about it anytime. Thank you for this opportunity to share this with you.